Now, that was something completely different. You didn't know gorillas could talk. Oh my goodness. Alright guys. Welcome to Jungle POK. It is hard to breathe in this mask. Oh my goodness. So, we'll turn off the monkeys and stuff. Alright guys, I'll take this one off too. Boy, that's warm stuff. Look at this setup though, that's kind of cool. I can swing around like that. Okay guys, hello, welcome. Catch my breath. I didn't know being a gorilla was such tough work. Okay, we're here to do another unpacking the topic video. That's what it would have been like in Planet of the Apes, if you went to Planet of the Apes school. Okay, anyway, let's talk about number 3. And I'll read that to you, and it'll be up there for a minute, like it is. Labels are a necessity in the organization of knowledge, but they also constrain our understanding. Okay, interesting. So it says discuss within 2A, labels are a necessity in the organization of knowledge, but they also constrain our understanding. Well, okay. So first of all, right off, what needs definitions in this? Okay, let's do what the topic's actually talking about first. Basically, it's saying this, that, okay, it's really focusing on language, obviously. And so if we're going to organize knowledge, just simply organizing history, science, human science as being two different things, arts, or if we're going to organize anything, I know this is bad, I know this is good, okay? We need to do this. This is how our mind works. We put things into categories. We do it like in biology, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. We do that, and those are different sorts of categories or labels of things, of types of things. And so it's saying basically that this is a necessity. We can't go around thinking of things being everything. That sounds a little bit vague, but you can't, you can't think of all. I have to label the difference between a rope and a monkey suit and a chair, and I have to think of one as, a tool, I guess, and one as something to sit on, and one as something silly. Well, they're primate suit, whatever. But anyway, so there's a label, monkey, primate. Okay. But anyway, so I have to do that. This is what it's saying, that it's a necessity to be able to label things. And by labeling things, you put it in a category. And by putting it in a category, it means it belongs in that category, and it does not belong in another category. Okay, does that make sense? So simply by labeling something as one thing, it means that it's not another thing. And in this sense, okay, it can also constrain our understanding because, and the reason for this, constraining your understanding means it, I guess, limits your amount of knowledge, makes you not understand things fully, I guess you could say, biases you to seeing things within a particular construct. So if I'm going to, if I'm going to label all NRA members as right-wing nut jobs, okay? If somebody's going to do that, well then all of a sudden that sort of label limits your understanding to seeing probably the complete diversity that NRA members have all over this nation. Just like if you were going, just like when Trump labeled the Seattle an anarchist zone, and people here are like, that's stupid. Well, no, it's a label, which is a generalization. Now, sure, there are those elements of anarchy, we can't deny it, but that doesn't mean the entire city is anarchy. And just like there are certain elements of NRA who are probably very right-wing, but that doesn't mean every single solitary person in that massive organization holds the same ideas. And in a sense, what happens is a label on either the NRA or Seattle as an anarchist district, a label constrains our understanding because we're focused upon the label and we're not focused upon the reality. So labels do that. And so, I mean, because if you're labeling something as something, it's that thing. Okay. And so that's kind of what the idea is about. It's not necessarily about politics, but that's the idea, and what we need to do is we need to apply that to areas of knowledge. And so labels, you need to define a label, a necessity. You should probably talk about a little bit in this topic why it's a necessity. Well, because it helps understanding. I mean, you can't go into a science lab and say, give me some of that. I mean, you have to have chemicals, and they have to have, how would you record your science if you didn't have labels of things? I mean, the molecules need to be different differentiations and different labels on them. And I mean, how would you do anything without labels? I mean, the world, we have words for things that exist, and they're symbolic, yes, but they still are things that exist, and we give them that label, we give them that symbol, that symbolic arbitrary word, which I've talked about many times in class. But they also constrain our knowledge. So how would this work? Let's talk about areas of knowledge that this could be. I think that this would be a really, really, really good question for art. Okay? People love to label art as being Renaissance art, or as being postmodern art, or being surrealist art, or being cubist art, or being, whatever. All kinds of labels that we love to put onto art. We love to put onto the artist. So he's a this type of artist, he's a this type of artist, and he's a this type of artist. And so, does art necessarily have to conform to a label? Can't somebody do something which is not really, like Picasso, couldn't he do something which is not his typical cubist art? Or let's say somebody wanted to try something which is cubist art. Can't he do that as a label? Do we misunderstand it because we put the label on it first? Oh, let's see how the surrealists do their thing. So, Salvador Dali and a number of others, let's see how they do things. Oh, they do like this, and what does this mean here, and what does this mean here, and what does this mean here? Art transcends labels. It certainly does. I mean, there's a movie, science fiction movie, and a drama, and romance, and a crime movie. I mean, they transcend these labels. And I think if you look at pieces of art as only one label, that's the things, then you can really constrain your understanding for the message because you're trying to make it fit into the label. Kind of like the idea of putting a circle and a triangle in one of those little things kids have, small kids, when they put the shapes in there. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. And I think that there's plenty of art, plenty of it, where you could look at artwork which transcends labels and is kind of in both or neither, or in different categories if you want, whatever the case. And I think you could find times when the artists themselves have been criticized. Van Gogh was one of them. Our artist was criticized because it kind of went against the things which people expected. Now, art is, it's not all of it, generalized, but a lot of art is about being in your face. It's about transcending the label which was, like the Beatles, they transcended the sort of like general sort of that rock at the time. They were something else. They broke out of the label, and if we want to call the Beatles a rock band, then well, okay, you can, that's a label, but they did much more than that type of stuff. And so that's the kind of thing, and I think that question works really, really well with art. But this is also, and I think, okay, let's talk about ethics, okay? Now, ethics being a bad, good, and if we're going to label bad and good as a particular type of theory, like let's say utilitarian theory, which is the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people. That which is ethically good is the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people. Now, if we were going to label behavior, human culture, under the umbrella that things should be run by utilitarian perspectives, okay? Greatest amount of good is the greatest amount of people. Well, it's very, very easy to not look at exceptions. What this means, the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people, is that, for instance, if more Nazis wanted to eradicate the Jews and there were more of them, and the Nazis themselves thought it was the greatest amount of good and there were more of them in that society, then it would be justified, the Nazis did, under utilitarian rule, under utilitarian theory. And that is abhorrent. I mean, you can make the same claim about the South when there was slavery. The greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people. Well, it was the greatest amount of good for the white people to subject black people to slavery. It wasn't good at all. And so, I mean, utilitarian theory falters. It fails. But if you were to label everything needing to be, should be, based on utilitarian perspectives, well, it constrains the understanding to looking at things from a narrow perspective. And I think that's the problem here. That's the problem. It's constraining to a certain label. It's putting things in, they need to fit into a category. And I really, really think that's a problem. And ethics and art are two very good areas of knowledge to be able to discuss in here, and to be able to discuss how this is true and constraining. Let's see, if history, sure, I think you could probably, if you labeled, sure, I think you could make it work in history. If you labeled the entire sort of let's say the war against the United States and the Taliban in Afghanistan, which started shortly after 9/11, okay, and is ending now, 20 years later roughly. But let's say that we wanted to, a historian wants to get how the war is, what the justifications for the war was, what it was like on the ground, what it was like for people. And let's say that the person completely disregarded as propaganda, religious, extremist, BS, everything that the Taliban ever wrote. That's propaganda, religious, extremist, BS. Written by cruel people who want to subjugate women. Okay? Now let's say that this historian labels it that way. He immediately, or she, immediately rejects all the knowledge that could be there. Sure, as a historian, you need to go in, in origin, purpose, value, content, limitations. You need to do that stuff. And you need to look at it objectively. But if you're labeling it as something, then you're not getting it objective and it's constraining your knowledge. And people did that. People did not give and still today, we do not give, a lot of the stuff, a lot of the history written from China, we don't give it any credit. The stuff written by the Soviet Union during the Cold War, we didn't give it any credit. It's not until later that you have this revisionist history which places some blame on the US in the Cold War. Or the West, really, in the Cold War. But I mean, you see what I mean? Until we accepted and took off the label, okay, all of this is crap, until we took that label away, we were constraining our knowledge from other perspectives, and we're still doing so. We still do so. And so there's plenty of real examples that you could look at and you could talk, oops, I don't want to mess up the light. All right, anyway, sorry. Had to have some exercise. Okay, so where was I? You also have to have some times when it doesn't. This is the counter to this topic. But they also constrain our knowledge. Well, sometimes they constrain our knowledge, sure. I've given you many examples where they can. But how about science? Do labels necessarily constrain our knowledge in science? Scientific language is specific for a particular reason, because it's very important in science to differentiate between things. Because if we're going to be exact, we can't be fuzzy in the middle. And I think if you're going to talk about experiments, and you're going to talk about a hypothesis, and you're going to talk about elements or your things that you're using specifically, and you're going to talk about how many millimeters or how many milliliters or how many milligrams, if you're going to talk about kilojoules of energy released, if you're going to talk about kinetic energy, if you're going to talk about specific things, how would you ever talk about them if they weren't specifically labeled those things? Science is about exactness. And you have to have labels to have exactness because we have to be talking about the same thing. That's like if I said 4 o'clock and you thought it was like 1 o'clock. Well, that's stupid. We would never get anywhere on time. Or we just didn't have any words for it at all. Just show up, just show up. Well, whatever. We made time because of a reason. We needed it. And the reason that we label things specifically and exactly in science is because we need it to be able to do the science. I'm an engineer designing an airplane, like they just have fuzzy words for everything. How would that work? Or developing a medicine, get some of that stuff and put some of that stuff in there too, and put some and warm it up a little. That's inexact stuff. Labeling things specifically, I would say probably does not constrain your understanding in science generally. And as a matter of fact, it helps your understanding because only by labeling things exact can we have exact experiments showing exact results and get exact conclusions from those results because we interpret the exactness of things when we come up with a conclusion and a result. And so I think with science, it's probably not really the case. I think it's a good argument. You could probably find ways in science that it could constrain things. But I think for the most part, the labeling of things in science is a necessity. I mean, how do we talk about kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species? How do we talk about categorizing animals in those things among characteristics without having those words in the first place? Oh, look, those ones, look, it's like, those ones have eggs. And I mean, just doing that as a label. We can't talk about anything. We can't do anything in science if we don't have specific labels for it. So I would say, as a counter, if you're going to do this question, as a counter, science is a good one because, I mean, it's very, very arguable that you just have to have labels and they don't constrain our knowledge. As a matter of fact, our knowledge would be constrained without the labels because we couldn't do the exact science that we need. But if you get something where it's not exact, like history, it's not exact like history or ethics or art or ethics, well then I think very easily you could constrain your knowledge by that. Math, I wouldn't even really do math on that question, to be 100% honest. I mean, you probably could. You label the things as axioms and that kind of stuff, and you label I probably wouldn't even do math on that. When it could be done, I mean, you talk about how we label those properties of numbers and things in math, and they are what they are, and they can't be anything else, and so on and so forth. And from those, we build the axioms and whatever. Sure, that's labeling, and it could work, and you could say, no, it helps with your understanding because instead of hindering it, because if we don't label things, if we don't explain the characteristics of things and say what they are and what they aren't, then we can't do any math because we can't determine the foundations. And so from that matter, then yes, you could probably do it in math pretty well. I think that there's probably a broader and better discussion to be had using other areas of knowledge in math. And religion, sure, absolutely. Yes, absolutely, you could use this very well in religion, labeling things as a heretic, labeling things as, labeling things as infidels, labeling things as terrorists, labeling things as radical Islam, labeling things as whatever the case is. Everybody loves to label everybody else. Every side does it. And so I think if we're going to label, for instance, somebody like Luther as a heretic for going against the church, or somebody like Galileo and Copernicus as heretics for going against the church, well, then what we really do in that instance is we very much limit, we constrain our knowledge, we see them as heretics, and we constrain our knowledge and don't look at the points that they have that are valid. And that's the thing, and you can do this in religion all the time. I mean, for instance, there's so many debates in religion about things and so many differences in religion about things. I mean, the Catholic Church still many religions, but the Catholics don't like the icons. And it's still labeled as iconoclasm, like worship of icons, what what the Eastern Orthodox Church does, because they use the icons as a kind of a mirror to pray to God. They don't worship the icons themselves. They're just using it as sort of a portal to be able to facilitate their praying. But anyway, so you can see that these labelings cause misunderstandings, and especially in religion, where religions have a lot to offer one another. They do. They have a lot of interesting, wonderful philosophical points. Whether you necessarily believe it or not, they have many wonderful points about how people construct their realities and believe about their place in the universe. And so it could very much label your things. And there's a million examples in religion where, yes, this is very much the truth. So I would go with probably, in this question, if you're going to do this question, I would probably go with one of those 4 areas of knowledge that I just talked about on one side, and then talk about science as the counter. And so, yeah. So that's it. Define labels, define what a necessity is, define constraining our understanding. Necessity in the organization of knowledge, that's what I mean. You could define that sort of bit. Okay, and with that, see ya. I'll just swing on out. All right. Question.